thanks very much for everybody attending, and also a massive thank you to Marion, who's going to be facilitating the session. Really looking forward to this session. She's going to be sharing the results of her research about self-kindness in HR professionals, and is it something that we practice what we preach? So I shall hand you straight over to Marion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing this and to share more about what I've been learning and how I hope it will be of interest and ultimately practical use. So as many of you, or those of you that I know, my background is in HR and I'm a strong advocate for the profession. I think we can and do add so much to organisations and have the potential to add even more. But we also know that there are a lot of challenges to the profession in terms of, seat at the top table, credibility, all the things that we seem to have been talking about for a long time. And when I look at the expectations of us as professionals, if I use, for example, the profession map the CIPD use, they talk about behaviours as things, outward manifestations of how we are behaving, so how we come across. But actually what I was quite interested in is what's happening inside, how are we operating in terms of how we think about ourselves, because we know how we think about ourselves will impact how we present and how we can subsequently behave. So this gave me an opportunity to investigate this a bit more. And my research was part of a MSc in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology at the University of East London. So it was fully ethics approved and supervised. And I chose to investigate the understanding and demonstration of self-compassion in female HR professionals, because it gave me an opportunity to bring together sort of two areas that I find really interesting. My personal learning and understanding around self-compassion has been immense over the last couple of years, and then that learnings from that combined with what we are trying to or are doing as a profession, I thought would be interesting to investigate. So it was some qualitative research. There's quite a lot of quantitative research around self-compassion, very little qualitative to actually understand people's experiences. So I chose to do some qualitative research, and I spoke to women who were either members or fellows of the CIPD, which is not suggesting there aren't other very competent HR people out there, but it gave some measure of what they'd achieved in terms of their career. And they were really open and really helpful in sharing their thoughts and behaviours. And then all the data I got from those interviews was collated to bring together for the findings that I want to share with you today. What I'm going to cover is what we mean by self-compassion, the evidence, the benefits of it, and then what was found around the barriers to showing kindness and compassion towards ourselves. And I started by asking participants why they chose a career in HR. And anybody want to just, I'll come off mute and perhaps share why they chose a career in HR. Interesting if it's similar themes. Anybody want to tell me? What I did find, which may resonate with you, is nobody set out from an early age to have a career in HR. Doesn't seem to have been an aspiration from the early years. However, most people had fallen into it in some way or another. And what was common amongst the route into HR was an interest in people and seeking to make a difference. So I don't know if that resonates. Yeah, so I've just seen a couple of the comments in the chat, so thank you. But yeah, this was very common that whatever route people had taken, it was around the people and seeking to make a difference. So let's now define self-compassion. And compassion in itself was defined by Dalai Lama as an openness to the suffering of others with a commitment to relieve it. Whereas self-compassion is treating ourselves with that same kindness. And that particular definition comes from the work of Christian Neff, who is very much the lead academic in the area of self-compassion research. You will find the scale that she produced, which I'll talk about in a minute, is used pretty much exclusively in research. But there are other definitions out there. One of her colleagues has a definition that talks about self-compassion as the capacity to comfort and soothe ourselves and to motivate ourselves with encouragement when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate. So I quite like that one as a definition as well. And when I was talking to the research participants, there was generally the understanding that self-compassion was and is about self-kindness. Drawing on the definition from Neff, she identified these 6 separate factors, which are divided between self-kindness and self-coldness. So the scale looks at the presence of self-kindness and the absence of self-coldness if we are demonstrating a high level of self-compassion. So self-kindness is around requiring an understanding towards ourselves as we would to others when experiencing suffering or failure, and actually recognizing that difficulties are inevitable rather than judging and criticizing ourselves when things are difficult. The common humanity recognizes that all humans suffer. We all find things difficult, rather than experiencing isolation in those feelings. I'm the only one that can't cope. I'm the only one that finds this difficult. And then mindfulness is the element of having a balanced, non-judgmental state about something, noticing thoughts and emotions rather than getting caught up in them. I asked people about the benefits of self-compassion, and that wasn't quite so easy for people to identify. They sort of recognised it was a good thing, but they couldn't really work out why. But there is an awful lot of research around the benefits of it. So just go through a few of them here. It is a strong predictor of well-being, and particularly psychological well-being. So psychological well-being includes the elements of sort of autonomy, having that freedom of how we operate, having the skills to do what we need to do, the opportunity for personal growth, having meaningful positive relations within our world, having a sense of purpose, and also self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is hugely important for psychological well-being, and you can see a strong link between that and self-compassion. So, strong predictor of cognitive and psychological well-being, where people were demonstrating a higher level of self-compassion. There's also a lot of evidence that would indicate that when people are being kinder towards themselves, they were then more likely to adopt other habits that were conducive to their well-being. So, for example, they were more likely to exercise and to stick to a healthy diet. They were less likely to smoke. And they were more likely to seek medical help when they need it. And there was also links to sleep quality and better sleep habits, although the evidence around that wasn't quite sure whether there was a causal or an outcome of that. The most convincing links is in relation to mental illness, particularly depression, anxiety, and stress. So it has been found through extensive research that higher levels of self-compassion have been linked to lower levels of depression and anxiety in particular, but also other illnesses. What makes sense within that is that people that had high levels of self-compassion were shown to have lower levels of cortisol within the body. And we know cortisol is the chemical that basically puts the body on stress response, high alert, stress. So by having less cortisol, they were going to experience less stress. And we know the link between stress, anxiety, and depression. So that all makes sense given other factors that we know. And then lots of links have been found to wisdom, happiness, optimism. Remember, optimism is a learnt behaviour, it's not a character trait. And then conscientiousness and worrying less. So these have all been evidenced in research about the benefits of it. Just want to make an observation around self-compassion and self-esteem or confidence. Often people are seeking self-esteem, increased confidence. But when we break down the elements of what self-esteem means, perhaps from a more academic perspective, we can see that self-compassion, so being kind to ourselves, provides the benefits of self-esteem, which will include feeling, more stable sense of self-worth, but without the pitfalls, the negative elements, which are often around comparison. And unlike self-compassion, self-esteem doesn't generally increase academic or job performance. And the particular thing with self-esteem that I think is worth noting is that generally, not always, but generally a sense of self-esteem comes from a sense of comparison. A sense of worth is gained through comparing with other people and a feeling of needing to feel as good as or better than. Whereas self-compassion doesn't have that comparative element. Gender difference. Now, here's an interesting area to think about. We know that HR is a profession that is dominated with women, 84% across the population, across the profession. We also know that figure reduces to 64% at senior level, and that came from CIPD research a couple of years ago. We also know that overall, men are more self-compassionate than women, but the data is very complex, it's not clear-cut. But it does align with other work that has been done that shows that women have higher levels of negative self-talk than men. And given that we know self-judgment is a negative factor in self-compassion, that makes sense. And we also know that women experience high levels of anxiety and depression, which we've also seen that self-compassion has a mediating effect on that. So I say it's not clear-cut, but there are definite links with that. And where is self-compassion misunderstood? When I was talking to people about, why were they worried? What got in the way? What were they thinking about? And there were a lot of misconceptions about what self-compassion was or is. And these were some of the selfish sugarcoating, a pity party, that the idea that if we put ourselves first, we can't be looking after others. Whereas actually we know the opposite is true when we look at it at a factual level. I've done so many sessions over the last few years on self-care. We know the mantras about, you can't pour from an empty container and put your oxygen mask on first, but there still persists that feeling that we have to put others first, which seems to become in a practice at the detriment of ours, or rather putting ourselves always last, which isn't always isn't a positive. It doesn't mean to say it's not selective. Sometimes we will obviously put people first. Sugarcoating, it's about if we're being soft and kind and fluffy and to ourselves, actually we won't deal with things. We won't notice when things have gone wrong. We won't learn from it. Whereas actually it's about acknowledging when things are difficult and from that place then driving for change and improvement, which we can do. And a pity party, that was that sense that people were wallowing in it. They were just noticing and just being just kind and letting themselves off. And because they were doing all that, they were never going to learn. They were never going to get better. They were just going to let themselves off. And then the findings. what came through so clearly were 3 barriers to self-compassion. So people understood it was self-kindness. They understood there were benefits to it. But these came through as 3 very clear themes as barriers to actually practicing it. These are a few quotes from the data. So sometimes it's helpful to be self-critical, but if you're too self-critical and you're beating yourself up about the smallest of things, that can have a negative impact on how you feel about yourself. And then somebody, the more successful I was, the bigger the fear of failure. And this one was really stark. You know, it's quite shocking to hear that, to write that internal dialogue down and see it in black and white, because I would never say those things in a million years to anyone else. That really shocked me, actually. I wouldn't expect anyone else to say that to me. Why am I allowing myself in this dialogue to say it to myself? So that was linked to that sense of low self-worth. And what was really sad with these is that the people that I interviewed were competent, friendly, outwardly confident, obviously, you know, doing a good job. They willingly were sharing and volunteering and helping me, but all this stuff was going on inside. The second one is around putting others first. And I sometimes think if you do any work around strengths, when you have a strength, you can have it as you're underutilizing a strength, you can use it at an optimum level, or you can overuse it. And in some ways, I kind of felt that the putting others first was being done as an overused strength, because it's good to be thinking of others, obviously, and putting others first appropriately. But when we are doing it to excess, then it ceases to always be helpful. And then from a professional capacity, think about what behaviours are we role modelling? And what message does it give about the value we put on our time if we're always immediately available? I'm not suggesting we never make time for others, but we can sometimes say perhaps later, or, you know, I've got a lot on at the moment, could we catch up tomorrow? If somebody says that to you, you know, it's usually fine. And then again, the third theme was the striving for better, which is great. We want to be striving for better. No argument with that. It's when we are doing it from a place of believing that what we're doing is never good enough, that it becomes unhelpful. When we're constantly seeking perfection, which actually doesn't exist. Continuous improvement and growth can exist, but perfection is something that, well, who's to say when we reach it? But it also means that we lose out on the benefits of recognizing and being satisfied with what we achieve if we're doing it to the extreme. So all of these things were really useful in understanding why people were finding it hard to be kinder to themselves, although they recognized it. And obviously participants showed it at different levels, but all the themes were showing in the majority of participants. This is obviously about our role, self-compassion, and how that might impact how we show up at work. And we know that people come into the profession because they want to help people. Certainly the sample that I spoke to wanted to make a difference and to help people. But actually we are in many ways potentially adopting behaviours that are counterproductive. They're not helping us do what we are achieving to do and aspiring to do in the best way. Evidence shows that if people are showing high levels of self-compassion, there's high levels of engagement. There surprisingly, or not at all surprisingly, there is hardly any academic research on people working in HR. There is loads of research about the profession, but very little around people within it. And the majority of specific research in self-compassion tends to be in the health sector. And when some research was done around with physicians, they were found to demonstrate lower levels of emotional, physical, and cognitive exhaustion when they had high levels of self-compassion, and were also shown to have a greater level of work engagement. But there's nothing to suggest that the findings within healthcare can't be related to other work environments that are characterised by, lots having to make lots of decisions, and where there is a level of expectation of caring, such as in HR, however you want to define caring. One bit I did find included HR professionals within the pool of participants, alongside occupational health counsellors and the police. And they found the lowest levels of self-compassion amongst HR, along with the lowest levels of personal growth and the least support in coping with challenging situations. Self-compassion has been associated with successful goal pursuit. So being kind to ourselves actually helps us work towards our goals, which again aligns with what we know about well-being. The impact on well-being of working towards goals is greater than the impact of well-being of achieving goals, which is more of a momentary surge in well-being or positive emotion. I didn't find any data that showed or indicated self-compassion had a negative impact on work performance. And whilst there is a general misconception that self-compassion could undermine motivation, it's been found that it reduces the fear of failure. And actually, if we have a reduced fear of failure, we are far more likely to give something a go, which I thought was a particularly interesting finding. So how might these findings help us? If I use my findings, which obviously I can't generalize to the whole population, but it is a useful point for discussion. If I generalize that we want to make a difference, that we care about others, of making their experience at work better, and we want our organisations to be successful, are some of these findings suggesting that part of our approach and thinking could be flawed in how we are going about that? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give you a bit of time to put you into a couple of groups and just give you a little bit of time to chat, reflect, and let me know what you think. I have got my findings that I've collated, and I'm happy to share them. If you'd like me to send to you directly, I can just stick me or email it into the chat and I can send them afterwards. But for now, let's just go into two groups, Joe, or am I doing them? I can't remember. Oh, right, I've got the breakout rooms back. Right, I'll do them now. Yes, create room. If you haven't got your camera or mic on, I hope once you get into the room, you'll be happy to put it on so you can have a conversation with people. And looking at the time, I'll give you 10 minutes to have that chat, and then we'll come back and see what your thoughts are. Actually, just before I do that, are there any immediate questions, any observations, challenges? You're interested? Okay, see what you come back with. Hopefully you'll have questions when you come back afterwards. But for now, I'll put you into the room and see you after. Anybody going to volunteer to just summarise the conversation you were having, please?
Sharon, do you want to go for it from our group, or Katie?
I think in our group we well, some of us actually quite related to a lot of the things that you were saying from your research, and I guess we were talking about how we would actually improve our self-compassion, and whether it was actually different depending on which route you'd chosen to go down in HR. So we talked about within what we see in our teams, maybe talent acquisition side being a bit more resilient, a bit more able to practice that self-compassion, whereas HR generalists who are potentially speaking a lot more to employees and having conversations more about well-being and hearing many more complaints and things, whether they find it actually harder. So maybe some of it is related to where you've chosen to go within HR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting as to whether, can you tell if somebody's being self-compassionate? Because, a lot of it is about that internal. But yeah, be interesting. Yeah,
one of the other points I made just as we were coming back into the room, Marion, as well, was that I don't know about everybody else, but I spend my day either on Zoom calls or team calls, and so in the old world, I didn't actually see myself very often. You had to go to the loo and wash your hands to see your face. But now I see a little postage stamp of myself pretty much from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So there is that kind of, I think, more knowledge about your self-tipping point, that you kind of finish the day and go, oh, actually, I didn't look great today, did I? Why is that? And have a bit of reflection in a way that you might not have done 2 years ago. You weren't seeing yourself. So I think there's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Simon, is there anything you'd like to contribute from your perspective?
Just one of the sort of the final questions I had was sort of people's perceptions or opinions on when if you like, your back's against the wall, do you still be as self-compassionate, or are you less or more self-compassionate? So if everything's going against you, do you change? Is it something you learn? Is it something you can put in place to either prevent things going right or wrong, or is it just sort of a natural ability?
I think there's a combination of sort of nature nurture as to how we get to where we are in terms of our level of self-compassion. I'll go on in a minute in terms of, yes, you can learn it. And I think it's about how we can't stop things going wrong through being self-compassionate. It's more about, some of the research shows about how we deal with things when they do go wrong, and how we are more resilient to be able to pick ourselves up to carry on. And it's about how we are supporting ourselves through those difficult times, rather than beating ourselves up because, we should have known better, or how did we do that, and all the internal stuff that can go on. But allowing an element of, right, that didn't go right. People make mistakes. What can I learn? How can I do it better next time? Rather than getting focused on the negative element of it. Does that make sense? Thank you. What about the other group? I joined you for a while and then drop out, but share what you were talking about.
If the others are okay, I seem to have done a lot of talking, so I'll carry on. So we looked at it from the other group. It sounds like we came at it from a different perspective, and that was, we were looking more about sort of why we do what we do, as in if we move into judgmental, or why we are not more self-compassionate. And there were a couple of interesting takes. For example, we talked about, is there a level of conscious choice? Are we consciously choosing to be self-compassionate or not? And that will be down to maybe the individuals or the circumstances. We all talked about being busy, elements of feeling guilt if we're not either seen or feel that we're not achieving. One comment was interesting from my perspective, was that when it was said that we're so busy both at home and at work sometimes that we don't even think of ourselves, which means that almost like we've erased our importance, and therefore anything like self-compassion almost like as not even on the page, let alone being talked or thought about. So I sort of flippantly said I was looking for a magic button. I know that's not necessarily going to be is the case, but for me it's about I know what I should be saying to myself, and I can say it, but the other half of my brain, or my chimp brain, is going, yeah, that's fine, but actually, Suzanne, you're still rubbish, you still failed, you still didn't achieve, you still didn't work hard enough. And then we get back into that vicious circle of beating yourself up, and the self-compassion goes out the window. So
thank you. Let's just bring things together a bit, because there are questions, can you develop it? The answer is you can. There are different ways of doing it. There's most of the research has been based on a particular program called the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, but there are a lot of other practical tools. My approaches are probably a more pragmatic. I know personally the mindfulness techniques are not the ones that I find most effective. I know they are very good for a lot of people, but I find the more practical techniques that I can use work better for me. But you definitely can develop it through, as all skills, it's a skill. We can develop it by practice and awareness. And if we think about what we're trying to achieve, we want to do well in our job. We want to create a good experience for people at work. We want our organisation to succeed. And actually, if we are looking after ourselves, it actually allows us to be and do our best much more effectively. And actually, the journey's nicer. In terms of my journey, my learning, I would say I've come a very long way. I'm still practicing, but it's interesting listening to the conversations around, taking self-compassion and thinking about self-care and putting ourselves first, which comes from the perspective that self-compassion is time-consuming. And I would argue actually the biggest difference for me has been around changing my internal dialogue, or working to continuing to work to change that. And actually it doesn't take any longer to think a kind, supportive thought as it does to think a harsh, critical talk. And actually that is what makes the biggest difference in terms of the actual measures of self-compassion. So yeah, I've certainly noticed it. I would say, if you think of the learning cycle, I've certainly moved from the conscious incompetence. I wouldn't say I'm totally into the unconscious competence bit yet, but certainly I noticed the difference. And what I've been doing with all my learnings is that I've brought them together into a particular program that I'm really excited about and enjoying, which draws on all the learnings from positive psychology, which is about making life better, and it's about how we can do more, achieve more, greater well-being, but actually through a perspective of self-kindness. So I hope the discussion has given you food for thought. Obviously this session was about sharing findings. I can't, unfortunately, I haven't got that magic wand or that instant button that Suzanne was looking for. I'm very happy to share that the findings. If you want to stick your email into the chat, you can just do it directly to me. If you don't want to put it publicly into the room, very happy to share that afterwards. But otherwise, thank you. It's been good to hear your thoughts and to see whether the findings resonated. So, Jo, can I pass back to you, please?
Yeah, so just want to say thank you very much for everybody attending. I hope that you found it useful. I know I certainly found it really interesting. I will send you out an email afterwards. And if you do want any more information from Marion, her contact details will be in the email, so please feel free to contact her. The next session that we're running is actually a webinar, and I will include the details on the email, and that's about a world of culture and communication in the workplace from a legal perspective, so you might find that interesting. But otherwise, thanks very much, and have a good afternoon.